Welcome to this month's safety focus topic. My name is Kevin Haas and I'm with True Safety Services. This month's safety focus topic is scaffolding. This training was developed in partnership between the folks at Front Range Roofing Systems and True Safety Services. This term scaffolding applies to any temporary work platform used in construction and can include things like suspended scaffolding. It can also include aerial lifts, but the type we're going to focus on most today is the normal self-supported scaffolding structures that we use to access our job sites. An estimated 2.3 million construction workers, or more than half of the construction industry at any one time, is working on scaffolding as we speak. Scaffolding that we use is often moved, assembled, and inspected by a third party, but it is part of our job site because it's part of how we get to and leave the location. The word I prefer to use for that is access and egress, which means how do you get to work and how do you get out of the job site in case of an emergency. Working around scaffolding is not without hazards. The hazards involved with scaffolding tend to include falls, unsafe access points, falling objects that can drop onto other workers below, which includes tools and materials stacked on scaffolding, scaffolding collapse itself, or electrical hazards associated with being on scaffolding. What we're going to focus on today are 6 basic rules for scaffolding safety. They include being mindful of our access and egress points, inspecting the scaffolding and being aware of its condition, the footing and the stability of the scaffolding, the capacity of the scaffolding and how we load it appropriately, being mindful of electrical hazards, as well as what do we do with tools and materials to keep them from falling on people below. I know that fall protection is something we talk about a great deal at Front Range because it's such a huge part of our worlds. But the rules of fall protection don't stop when we step off of the roof and onto what is usually the way we access the roof, by scaffolding. On scaffolding, fall protection is required for any exposed edge over 10 feet. So if there's a 10-foot drop to the area below, or you are more than 10 feet in the air, some sort of fall protection needs to be in place. The most common form of fall protection is going to be the guardrails. Guardrails on scaffolding need to be 42 inches high, plus or minus 3 inches, and there needs to be a mid-rail at 21 inches high. Those railings need to be capable of withstanding 200 pounds of force applied directly sideways without failing. Sometimes the cross bracing or the X-shaped braces on scaffolding can be used as the fall protection guardrail, but if they're going to be used for that, they need the crossing point. The X point of the cross braces needs to also be at 42 inches high. If the proper guardrail systems are not in place or the cross braces cannot be used as guardrails, then we need to use personal fall arrest devices, just like we would anywhere else on the roof. That means tying in with a harness, lanyard, and an anchor point capable of supporting at least 5,000 pounds. Never use ladders, steps, buckets, or any improvised device to try to gain more height working off of a scaffolding. There are certain circumstances in which we can do this, but it's really complicated. One of the biggest dangers is that when we set up a ladder, if it leans on anything else and its footing is on the scaffolding, the force of the ladder is actually trying to push the scaffolding away from whatever we're leaning against. So we never lean a ladder from scaffolding to something else. And if we're on a ladder on top of scaffolding, we're often above the railings. So if we fell off of the ladder, we would fall all the way off the scaffolding. So in general, this is a terrible idea. If you ever need to get more height, if you need to use a device of this nature, let us know and we can help you work through the particulars. The biggest thing we are typically using that scaffolding for is just simply to get to our work location, to get onto the roof, right? Just remember that even though it's not our scaffolding and it's not our work location, we do need to be mindful of the walking and working surfaces that we're accessing. So the steps on scaffolding, for example, need to meet all the same requirements of steps anywhere else, any other building. That means walkways and planks at least 18 inches wide. No gaps between the scaffolding and the building should never be more than 14 inches wide. There are a couple of exceptions, but in general, 14 inches is the rule. There should never be more than a 2-foot vertical change that you have to step onto or off of. So if you have to step off of the scaffolding onto a building, for example, and it's more than 2 feet down or up, then we need to make proper modifications or add a stairway. Ladder rungs need to be appropriate and they need to be intended and built for that purpose. So if we're using part of the scaffolding to climb, the ladder rungs need to be at least 8 inches wide. And we never use something like the cross bracing or the structure of the scaffold to climb. That's never acceptable. I know it's not typically Front Range's responsibility to inspect the scaffolding that we're using. That scaffolding is installed and inspected by a competent person, often by a third-party company who provides the scaffolding for the contractors that we work for. However, it is reasonable to think that we would at least take a look at some basic things because it's our safety, it's our employees who are using the scaffolding. So as you approach a job and as you approach the scaffolding stairways every day, take a quick look from afar. Look at that scaffolding. Does it appear to be plumb, level, and square? I'm not saying you have to get out of level and check every post and brace, but when you look at it, is it parallel to the building? Is it leaning one way or the other? Does the footing look solid? Does it appear to be damaged, bent, twisted? Has it been racked in such a way that it's no longer square? Are all the cross bracings in place? Or do you ever see connections that are missing the safety pins? Make sure the guardrails are still in place and they're still pinned in place with the safety pins. And take a look at the planking. There should never be more than a 1-inch gap in the width of the planking so that it can't shift from side to side. All the surfaces need to be completely decked and completely secure so that it doesn't move around when we're using it, even if we're only using it to get to the roof. We also want to be mindful of the footing that the scaffolding is sitting on. Again, I'm not saying it's our job to inspect completely, but you do want to take a look and make sure that the scaffolding is sitting on wide metal plates, or what we call mud sills, boards that are put into the ground in order to spread out the load of the scaffolding. There should never be raw metal posts, so all scaffolding has to sit either on metal plates or on caster wheels. It needs to be on a dry, stable, solid surface that's not going to shift or compact under the weight of the scaffolding. And if there's more than a 4-to-1 ratio, what that means is the scaffolding is more than 4 times as tall as it is wide, then the scaffolding needs to somehow be secured to the building that it's next to so that it can't be tipped over. All elements of the scaffolding are designed to accommodate 4 times the anticipated load. So the scaffolding needs to support its own weight, the weight of all workers, all tools, all materials, times 4. Most scaffolding was never intended for material stockpiles. So before we do something like pile a bunch of materials or chemicals or roofing materials on a scaffolding platform, we need to check in with the contractor and make sure that the scaffolding capacity was rated for that. Also, scaffolding was almost never calculated to bear any kind of side loading. What does that mean? That means if we have a swinging load on a crane, for example, and it's going to get anywhere near the scaffolding, be mindful that the scaffolding may support a great deal of weight in a directly downward force, but if we impact it sideways with something like a swinging load, the scaffolding itself may not be designed to withstand much force at all. We could twist, break, or otherwise knock down, collapse a huge section of scaffolding with people on it potentially. So we need to make sure we stay well away from the scaffolding with forklifts, telescoping load handlers, and suspended loads of all kinds. We also want to be mindful that a heavy wind load can put a sideways shear on to a scaffolding system. So scaffolding was not meant to be used in a very high wind situation. If you have any doubts, stop, back up, stop work, let's reassess and talk to somebody. There should be a competent person on every job site, or at least associated with every scaffolding system, who can answer those questions for us. Most modern scaffolding now is made of aluminum or other lightweight metallic materials, which means that the entire system is grounded. That can present an extra hazard to us when it comes to electrical contact. I know that electricity is always on our minds and we're being mindful of overhead power lines. Just understand that that applies even more so in some circumstances when we're working on and off of scaffolding. We need to make sure if there are overhead lines, if they are normal lateral lines running just to a single building, most of the time our minimum clearance to those lines is going to be 3 feet. But if they're what we call primary lines, up to 50 kilovolt lines, the overhead lines, we need to stay at least 10 feet away. We need to make sure our extension cords are in good shape. And I know you guys are great at that. I'm out there in the field and I check your extension cords, very seldom find a problem. But be aware if we have something like an extension cord going over the railing of a scaffolding, If we move the extension cord just right and there's a bare wire, it can electrify that entire scaffolding system. So somebody else on the ground approaching that scaffolding, putting their hand on the handrail, could be in danger. So electrical grounding systems are even more important when it comes to scaffolding. The use of either an assured grounding program, meaning that everything is grounded, or the use of a ground fault circuit interrupter. Those extension cord plug-in tools that help make sure that tools are isolated from a ground fault. Another serious concern when it comes to scaffolding is simply being mindful of the workers who may be near or under the scaffolding. So if we're ever going to be working off of scaffolding and we have tools or materials on top of the platform, then we need to have toe boards in place that would prevent us from kicking tools or materials off. Be mindful to never pile materials next to the side of scaffolding, and never ever pile materials any taller than the toe board. Most of the time, toe boards are 2x4s, so they're 3.5 inches tall. If we put 5.5 inches of piled materials and it falls over, it will go over the toe board. So be mindful, if we're going to pile materials on scaffolding and we need to make piles taller than the toe board, then we need to put some sort of fencing like what you see in this picture. Fencing can be an acceptable alternative, and a lot of scaffolding will have a complete fencing system. If for some reason we couldn't put toe boards in place and we couldn't make sure that we're not dropping tools, then the area under and around the scaffolding on the ground needs to be completely barricaded so that nobody can pass underneath us. Or another option would be we put every tool and every piece of material on a lanyard. You folks are fond of reminding me that that's not terribly convenient, and I have to agree with you. But we always need to be mindful of how we're protecting people on the ground underneath us. As always, I like to end these safety trainings with the core principles of Front Range Roofing. The first of those is excellence. And every week you're used to me telling you that we begin with the end in mind. But what I'm telling you today is that the process is also important when it comes to excellence. I know we're only using the scaffolding to get to our work site, and we often don't think of that as a part of our product, but the process is important. We expect the best from ourselves, and so we expect the best from the job site around us and the best from the people who put up that scaffolding, inspect and maintain that scaffolding. We look out for hazards, not only the ones that we create, but the ones that could affect us, could affect our employees, our workmates, and other people around us. So we strive to protect each other. That is one of the ends that we begin with. Passion means going the extra mile. Even when you may not think that's a part of our job, we need to make daily equipment inspection one of our consistent daily habits. Integrity means doing the right thing when we're not being watched. It means we accept no excuses. It means that even when it may not seem necessary or there's no chance of anybody catching us or holding us accountable, that we're keeping an eye out for defaults and hazards, defects that could hurt somebody, and it doesn't matter who. Even if it's not one of our employees that ends up getting hurt, if we see something that's not right, we have the integrity to point it out and say something and get it fixed. Gratitude is our way of acknowledging that we are connected to the people around us, to the job sites, to the customers, and to the communities. Most people will pass right by a safety problem without saying anything, without even being mindful enough to notice it. We understand that we keep ourselves safe, and we are helping to keep others around us safe. And that's part of what we do to give back to the community around us. As always, I want to say thank you. Thank you for choosing True Safety and letting us be a part of your amazing journey as you folks go out and try to be the best roofing company out there. Thank you for letting us be with you on that journey. If you have any questions or any concerns, as always, stop us in the field. We're happy to speak with you and answer your questions about it. Folks, have a great one and stay safe out there.